Welcome to It Starts Within, a podcast from Platinum Performance, where we'll dive into the health challenges faced by veterinarians and horse owners alike. Join us for inspiring stories about the latest advancements in equine care, treatments, and comebacks. You'll hear interviews with elite competitors, innovative researchers, and the veterinarians that devote their lives to horses and the humans that love them. At Platinum Performance, we know the power of nutrition starts within. Hello, all, and welcome to the podcast. I am Jessie Bengoa, and today you're in for a great discussion, a three-pronged perspective on one of the most important topics in equine performance, and that is how to properly maintain, optimize, and bring back a horse's vital core strength, including the all-important top line. So with me to give this topic a 1-2-3 punch are a trifecta of experts in their respective fields. So first up, we have Dr. Matt Durham, who's a board-certified equine sports medicine and rehabilitation veterinarian. And for those of you who have not heard Dr. Durham on the podcast before, Dr. Durham practiced equine veterinary medicine hands-on horses for over 20 years at the renowned Steinbeck Equine in coastal California. And he worked on sport horses at the highest level of the game. So at Platinum, we got to know Dr. Durham as a close friend of ours and a strong believer in nutrition. And now we're really lucky to call him a friend and a colleague here at Platinum as our senior veterinarian. And next up is Abby Keegan. Hi, Abby.
Hello.
Hello. Abby is an equine clinical nutritionist and another colleague here at Platinum. And she holds a master's in equine nutrition and has over, I'm going to date you, Abby, sorry, girl, over 20 years of experience in the field. And she's a competitive rider herself, and she has long experience working with veterinarians and riders to help optimize their horse's health, but also their performance and their longevity by incorporating the right nutritional support. And last but certainly not least, joining the three of us, we have Maija Luttinger. Maija is the talent and the expertise behind Freely Forward Bodywork. Say that 3 times fast. Feel like I nailed it. And we are so happy to bring you her insights on this topic from a bodyworker's perspective. And she's going to tell us all about exactly what that means and really her wheelhouse. And she works in tandem with veterinarians, farriers, chiropractors, saddle fitters, coaches, and the entire care team to really help ensure a horse's muscular system is functioning at its peak, and also to help address certain concerns that may be going on, you know, with that horse's specific breed, conformation, age, activity level, you name it. Maija sees it, and she sees it often. So welcome to the three of you, and thank you for being with me here today as we dive into examining the equine core and specifically zeroing in on the top line. So thanks for being here, folks. So Dr. Durham, I'm going to kick this over to you to start it off. I feel like every discussion can benefit from a good foundation, and there's a lot of misconceptions surrounding what exactly constitutes the core, quote unquote. And those same misconceptions exist in humans as well. So that's worthy of noting. And we focus so much on the muscles that we can see with our eyes. But in fact, the core goes well beyond the top line alone or the abdominals alone. Can you explain the equine core to us to kind of kick us off and what it's comprised of and how vital its function is to both high performance and career longevity in the horse?
Absolutely. And I'm glad, I think a lot of times the conversation stays with just top line, and I think we need to look well beyond that. Ultimately, if you think of the spine as sort of a string of pearls, the core, whether it's our core or horse's core, does the job of stabilizing that and then moving the body into different postures and then using that for propulsion or for other movements. So it's really important to have muscles on top and bottom and on both sides of the spine in order to stabilize and then also move it. So the muscles that we see the most, of course, are the muscles on the top line. The primary one is going to be the longissimus. This is a really big muscle. It's very long and comprises the majority of what we see on the top line. There are a lot of other ones. Um, and this is the one that we see also when it's not there in horses that are either old or old plus have Cushing's disease, better known as PPID. Uh, those horses are prone to losing muscle, but we also see it, of course, with malnutrition, but also with some other situations too, where that muscle can be lost. But beyond that, uh, there's some other really important stabilizing muscles. One's called the multifidus. This is a series of muscles. It literally means multi-folds. And each one joins one vertebra to the next one, to the two behind, and then about three behind. And there are variations all along that. This muscle continues actually into the tail, all the way up to the pole. And it's a really important muscle. If you measure actually electrical activity in muscles to see what's going to fire in what order, the interesting thing, if I went to pick up a cup of coffee, you would think, okay, well, the shoulder muscles, maybe the hand grip muscles. The first muscle to fire is the multifidus, because again, that wiggly chain of beads needs to be stabilized into that position that I put myself in order to pick up that coffee cup. So the multifidus is one of the most important intrinsic muscles. It's deep down. It's not one that you can actually palpate. There's a part of its cousin up under the withers you can palpate, but the primary multifidus muscle is primarily just very deep and very close against the vertebrae. This is a muscle that's been studied a lot in terms of stability in the spine. In humans, it's known that core stabilization will return athletes quicker to the field and reduces the risk of further injury. So that core stabilization, it's something that you don't see. It's not the six-pack abs, but it's a really critical muscle. And there are a lot of really interesting ways that we can help to build that muscle. And we know, too, there have been studies that have shown that lameness in a certain limb can lead to a decrease in that. So we think about, oh, it's just lameness in the limb, but that has an effect on the entire horse, of course. So when we think about the top line, one of the misconceptions is that big longissimus muscle actually lifts the top line. But if you think of what a muscle does, it has one job: it gets shorter. So if you're above that wiggly chain of beads and you get shorter, it actually causes arching of the back. So if you know the yoga moves of cat cow, then the muscle that makes you go into the cow position is actually the same. In us, it's called erector spinae, but in horses, that's the longissimus. That actually causes the back to arch, to bow into lordosis. To go up, that's where the abs come in. And in horses, the abdominals are so far away from the spine that we tend to not think of it as a core stabilizing muscle, but they really are quite important for that. The pelvis sits at an angle like this, and the sternum sits here, and essentially a lot of the movement that comes at the canter in particular comes from flexing of the pelvis relative to the lumbar spine. And a lot of that comes from the abdominal musculature. There are some stabilizing muscles immediately under the spine that are also very important, the iliopsoas complex. And this, interestingly, there's very little of it in the chest region, the thoracic region. It starts at the end of the chest region and runs back under the lumbar spine, the back. and attaches further back on the main thigh bone and some other areas. There's definitely some stabilization that happens there, but ultimately the longissimus muscle, its main use comes in tying in with the gluteal muscles in this sort of sling that helps to propel the horse forward, really from that inflection point that's at the lumbosacral region. So the back of the lumbar region back to the sacrum, that's where a lot of movement happens. And horses actually have kind of a lack of mobility in their lumbar region compared to, say, a dog or a cat. And I heard someone talking about cheetahs, and they said, oh, if a horse had a back that flexible, they could run 90 miles an hour. They would break their back, is what would happen. They're too big. And actually, in racehorses, one of the fractures that can happen is through there from that increased mobility through the lumbar spine. So the stability through the lumbar spine is what allows that propulsion forward. So it's just a fascinating area. And one of the things I think that's important is when we see the loss of top line musculature, we almost always have loss of musculature in other areas, including the abdominals. But the abdominals are muscles that are really hard to evaluate in horses without ultrasound. So when you see loss of top line, a lot of times that means loss of musculature everywhere. Someone like Maija, whose hands are right on that horse all the time and is going to pick up on more subtle things, is going to find muscle loss in the neck, in the hip, and probably a lot of areas that most of us might not notice. But I think that's one of the important things, that when we're looking at that we try to understand, is it just in the back? That can happen, particularly if there's back related pain. But a lot of times it's more of a global problem. Anyway, I've gone on a rant again, Jesse. Sorry.
Dr. Durham, I could listen to your rants all day. You go. But you can tell I have a little boy because I'm like, oh, Longissimus and Multifidus sound like they're going to join Optimus and fighting the Decepticons. They sound like a whole bunch of Transformers.
I think so, yeah.
And then tomorrow morning, when I go to lift my coffee, I'm going to think about you and my multifidus muscle. So
And your multifidus, yeah.
We were most certainly paying attention to your rant. Love it. So I want to turn to Maija next. And Maija, you obviously spend a lot of your time addressing the equine core, which we now understand that goes significantly beyond the top line and the abdominals to really support the spine. And the top line is a really important part of that. So how common is it to see performance horses whose riders and trainers always have the absolute best intentions, but these horses don't necessarily have an optimized core or top line? So what are you often seeing in terms of common shortcomings in this musculature, and how does it affect a horse's biomechanics in real everyday life?
Oh my gosh. Well, I want to go on a rant of my own. First of all, Dr. Durham, I love everything that you just said. I actually give a specific free lecture whenever someone asks me to come teach at a pony club or anything like that. And the spiel that you just gave was almost word for word, except much better than what I normally tell people and explain to people. You're so, I don't need to tell you that you're so spot on, but you're truly so spot on. And I'm definitely going to go back and listen to this podcast again for myself and take some notes on what you just said, because I love your string of pearls analogy. And you're so incredibly right about the importance of the top line when it comes to the function of the rest of the horse and how it moves. I just want to add on to that really quick before I answer your question, Jesse. And part of the thing that I do when I really explain to people why body work is so important to horses, but then really specifically beyond body work, why the health of your horse's back is so incredibly important, is that the back is really a highway for the rest of the body's movement to be able to function. And if you think about Dr. Durham talked about how lower limb injuries often are showing atrophy in the multifidus. There was actually a really interesting research study in humans that showed multifidus atrophy is a precursor to injuries in human athletes doing injuries to their lower limbs. So it actually really goes back and forth. In humans in general, nothing in the body can be separated. We're all incredibly connected through our musculature and our fascia. But in horses, because they're quadrupeds and every limb relies on each other to load effectively, that's even more so the case. And in the case of the top line and the abdominals, this I think partially answers your question, Jesse, but I'd love to flesh it out more with you. When I talk to a lot of trainers, I think that they think back health is maybe secondary to limb health, and it's maybe something that they're possibly doing to quote unquote spoil their horse, or if they really love their favorite horse, that's the horse that they're really looking out for their back. They have a good custom saddle, etc. But I would really love to emphasize for all of those people that back health is not just something that is nice for the horse to feel comfortable. It's really incredibly crucial to a horse's longevity and ability and potential in the sport. And that's because, again, the back is truly a highway, right? So if we're thinking about going back to that study that showed that multifidus atrophy and back pain can actually be a precursor to lower limb injuries in humans. Think about the last time, if anyone listening to this has had severe back pain, think about how badly you move. And think about 1,000-pound horse moving unevenly because an area of their back hurts really badly because of something like kissing spine or poor saddle fit. Very quickly, the load distribution of that 1,000-pound animal will become uneven on their limbs. And that is a very quick precursor to injury and unnecessary wear and tear. The thing that frustrates me as a body worker and as someone who used to be a FEI groom and a high performance rider myself is that something I see a lot is people act like these injuries are just a part of the sport. And of course they are. It's not always something that we can prevent with these animals and what we ask them to do. But to be honest with you, I think that a lot of people think something like, oh, a horse only has so many jumps in them. They only have so many 20-meter circles in them. But movement is good. Movement is medicine for horses, in my opinion. Movement is medicine for every living being, but it has to be the right kind of movement. It has to be the right kind of footfall. It has to be an even load distribution by the body. And if there is back pain, because that back is really the highway and what allows the body to move, if there's back pain, that load is going to be inconsistent. The footfalls are not going to be as even because the horse doesn't feel like they can move appropriately through their body. And that can very quickly potentially cause unnecessary wear and tear and unfortunately a really devastating injury. So it's baseline very important for your horse to just feel comfortable from an animal welfare standpoint. But I also really want to encourage the trainers and the people who are listening to this who might have that mindset that I even used to have when I was a high performance rider myself, which is that, you're kind of just doing this back pain thing and you're looking out for saddle fit and you're looking out for your horse's back because you love them. It's so much deeper and so much more important than that.
No, I love that. I think that those are good words to remember for all of us who are riders and love our horses. And, you know, core discussions always make me think of even the most basic of terms, like, oh, I'm going to be using my horse. I've got to go get them legged up. It's like, okay, but it goes so far beyond their legs. We're getting their legs more conditioned and muscular, but at the same time, we need to be really focusing on that musculature that surrounds their spine and creates their stability and allows for that free movement. So I love that. And Also, Maija, I have a lot of questions in my brain for you, but I'll try to keep it to a minimum. Um, One thing that I got to thinking is, I feel like we unfortunately have a rising number of horses that have some form of metabolic dysfunction and excess fat. Talk
Yeah.
to me a little bit about that in your work, because I feel like perhaps, that ties in, not even perhaps, it does, no question, tie in to core fitness or a lack thereof. But we also have, a surprising number of performance horses that are out there competing that in reality do deal with metabolic dysfunction and probably some excess weight. So talk to me about how much of that you're seeing. Is that a trend? Is it something that you're counteracting? What's going on, in your daily work with that?
Well, honestly, I think that this could be a podcast episode in and with of itself because it's something I have noticed a lot. And the interesting thing, and I think that honestly, Dr. Durham and Abby are probably much better qualified to talk about it in general and its effect on performance horses. But I have noticed that overweight and metabolic horses are typically very sore and they have a specific kind of tightness and stuck feeling in their body for me to work on them that typically translates to that stuck tight feeling um for the rider and what they're experiencing. And I really noticed that, maybe part of it is just the fact that they are overweight, and being overweight is naturally harder on any body to move, especially when it's on such a larger scale with such big animals and what we ask them to do. But I do definitely notice that this is something that's coming up more and more. I think that I don't know, and I think that, the two other experts here might be better able to explain it, but it does seem to me like it's something that's maybe getting diagnosed more and more often and people are catching it earlier and earlier, which is really incredible because actually my best friend just went through a really interesting thing where her dressage horse had all of these issues and was exhausted and seemed totally burnt out and didn't want to compete anymore. And she actually figured out that she had a metabolic issue, even though the horse did not present with the typical Cushing signs. So I really love how much more thorough we've gotten in the equine sports medicine industry, and how much more thorough and how much more prone to, it. When I was a kid growing up in Iowa, we didn't really do diagnostics until the horse was either totally lame or had this four. Moving out to Chester County, which is an incredible horse-centric area, and maybe also the way things have developed in the last 10 years, I love how vets are so much more prone to, as soon as the horse is not feeling well and their performance is declining, starting to do diagnostics and being able to catch that sort of thing earlier and help the horse very early on until before it's something really serious.
Yeah, absolutely. Catching the small things before they become the big things. So interesting. Well, thank you for that, Maija. It was just something that popped into my head because I'm sure that's something that you unfortunately encounter. And everybody here in this group spends a lot of time trying to counteract. So I appreciate that. And Dr. Durham, I want to pop back over to you real quick because we've been talking about what constitutes core musculature and the
Mhm.
top line, but talk to me a little bit about what a quote unquote healthy top line looks like versus an unhealthy top line and some factors that can contribute to a decline in the top line.
Well, I think um, there are a couple ways to think about that. I think the most obvious is just how the horse looks, right? And the main problem with that is that that can be a little bit deceiving because the two things that can sit on a back are going to be fat and muscle, and they can both fill that space. So, for example, if you have an old horse and you just feed him a lot of grain, you might fill the space, but you're not filling it with muscle. And that's an important distinction for us to make. And a lot of that you can feel with firm pressure of on your hands. But I think ultimately part of what Maya is talking about is that this is a functional piece of the horse. So it's not just how it looks, but it's also how it moves. So when I palpate a back, I want to see that it has some nice elastic movement. You have to take into account the personality of the horse. With a body worker, they're probably a little more relaxed than they are with a veterinarian. Um, but we want to have some lateral mobility. We want to have some up and down mobility. The musculature should feel firm, but not rock hard, right? We want to have toned muscles, but not spasming muscles. So a lot of it isn't just visual, but by feel. And this is something that when I work with body workers, I always ask them, what are you finding? Because they have a couple advantages. One is they're seeing those horses often more frequently than I am, a little like the farrier does, but also this is what they specialize in, right? So they're picking up all these subtleties and they know these horses. So then when things start to change, we can start to pick up on things. Is there a little less muscle on the left side than there is on the right, and that's changed over the last couple of months? That's important, right? There could be some primary back problems, the facets between the joints, the intertransverse joints, or a lameness problem, right? All of those things might be subtly pointed to by some of those changes. But ultimately, we want to just see nice musculature with good tone and filling in the spaces, right? We all sort of know what that fit horse really looks like. That's really what we're going for. We want that. We don't want to have hollow sides, right? That's a horse, even for the slimmer bodied, the slimmer type horses, right? Like an endurance horse who's not going to have the giant musculature. They have the slow twitch muscle, or the slow twitch muscles, which aren't as big as, say, in a quarter horse or in a warm blood. So they're going to have that more kind of like a marathon runner sort of build, but they're still going to have musculature in there. And where a quarter horse might have a little bit more, we still are going to see that all of those spaces filled pretty well. I guess that's what I would say.
Excellent. Okay, well, I appreciate that. And I want to next come over to you, Abby. Um, and one of the things, there's a lot of things I should say that can lead to a decline in top line, but one of those being nutritional deficiencies. And you are the one, Abby. School us, girl. But I want to understand, you know, it can be in any horse, but especially in competitive equine athletes. Talk to me about this and about some of the nutritional factors that can often, be overlooked. No one's certainly meaning to do that, but it can be easy to do. So talk to me about those nutritional factors that play into the top line and how we should be paying attention, what we should be paying attention to.
Yeah, I love this conversation, by the way, as well as someone who personally is rehabbing myself and from a surgery on my foot and having been non-weight bearing, as well as my own show horse who had a tendon injury. And so you guys are making me think a lot about, you talk about putting them back to work, right? Or like, let's get back into it. And I've really tried to be very, very conscious of these really tiny little movements and this dynamic mobilization exercises and things, getting him back to, as well as myself, right? So that we don't have an injury again. So love all of this conversation. But so obviously when we think about lean muscle tissue, we're thinking about protein or the amino acids that comprise it. And so often in the diet, unfortunately, in feed tags and hay analysis, we're looking at crude protein. And I think it's important for folks to understand that we can measure protein in anything. So literally we could take shoe leather if we wanted, right? And we can measure the percentage of nitrogen that's in that shoe leather and multiply it by 6.25. And we could understand the crude protein content of shoe leather or wood fines, for example, which are 7% crude protein. So again, I think it comes down to what is that source, right? So it's more important to think about the amino acid content, and we can talk some more about that. Yeah, so it's really looking at the amino acid content of the diet. Do we have the right calories there? I think so many times we think about how do we build that lean muscle tissue, and certainly exercise has a huge piece in that. But even just the right nutrition or amino acids present can also stimulate what's called mTOR, which is stimulating protein synthesis in the body, in the horse's body. So that's a key component of it as well.
Well, and
Yeah,
Abby, we'll allow it.
if I could just add on, I think one of the things that people get hung up on is that, oh, well, to build muscle, you have to, work more. And most of the time that's the case, right? If you train by sitting on the couch all the time, then those are the muscles you're going to have, not much. But say, for example, in eventers, they're really going for that aerobic fitness. So a lot of times they're working and working and working and working and working, and they can lose muscle by working that much if they're in an energy deficit, not just energy deficit, but again, I think one of the sayings I've heard is that horses don't have a protein requirement, they have an amino acid requirement. Because if you're not getting specific amino acids that are really important for muscle building, then essentially you're missing, you're unable to make that protein. So that rate limiting step is very important. So in particular, the branch chain amino acids are important. One of the cousins, this beta hydroxymethyl butyrate, is one of the few things that's been shown to stimulate muscle growth. But without the ingredients, it's not going to happen. So I think that's when I see a horse who has a poor top line, then the veterinarian in me thinks, okay, is it undernourished? Does it just need its teeth done? Does it have a big parasite load? Is there underlying disease? Does it have one of those diseases that we know directly impacts musculature, like PPID, and honestly, metabolic syndrome does as well to a degree. And this is really important, especially in some of the horses who tend to be on the higher body condition score range in competition, because judges like them to look a certain way. Looking at you, dressage and hunters, right? They tend to be muscular. And if you are a person who's overweight and you're working, I go to the gym and I see some big people, and they're probably fitter than I am by far because they're moving. They're really using their bodies. And we know that's okay. We know that that's in the healthy range. But as soon as they have an injury, they're deconditioned, and they're not, they're locked up in a stall because of a tendon injury, then that metabolic condition becomes really critical at that point. And that's when those horses really start to spiral and to really go downhill.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah.
We've talked so much about the things that can be down that road, when you're dealing with what's the kind term, an overnourished horse. Muscular is going to be my new favorite term. But an overnourished horse, it really is a real thing. And it's hard on these horses because they are athletes and they are competitive and they are out there doing, what we're asking them to do. But there's things that are down that road, and there can be things that nobody wants to deal with, like laminitis and things that result from these metabolic dysfunctions. So I'm glad you brought that up, and I'm going to be using that muscular term a lot. So thanks a lot, Dr. Durham, for that. But Abby, it got me thinking what you were saying. Because beyond these branched chain amino acids and the protein, that is so vital resulting from that, I feel like Dr. Durham and I have this conversation a lot, that that spine, that top line, those core muscles are attached to a horse, right? And to Maija's point, veterinarians are so much more well-versed and proactive at a whole horse approach. So Dr. Durham just got done saying that, when I'm a veterinarian and I see a poor top line, I'm asking questions, like is there a parasite load? Is there pain going on that is causing this? Has this horse been overworked? Is it undernourished? All the questions where we're not just zeroing in on this one symptom or this one manifestation, but we're treating it as a horse. So nutritionally, why is that foundation? Because we preach it all day long at Platinum, foundational health, foundational nutrition. But why is that so important for everyday horses, but particularly competitive horses and horses that are in training and competition?
So one of the most common misinterpretations, I should say, going back to talking about lean muscle tissue and fat deposition over the horse's top line. Do you guys ever hear people say, I want more weight over my horse's top line? Yeah. And so when you hear the word weight, most individuals think of what?
Poundage.
They think of fat, right? Yeah. So that's commonly what we'll see is people adding fat to the horse's diet, right? Which is not going to build lean muscle tissue. That's going to add other things back to the musculature that we were talking about. So absolutely. So we're thinking about the amino acid composition of the diet. Of course, kind of rolling things back a little bit here. The horse does require essential amino acids in the diet. So there are 20 amino acids, 10 of them are essential. And that means we have to feed them in whatever it is we're giving to the horse. So back to, thinking about crude protein of different things. Again, if we don't have that right balance of amino acids present, we can't build lean muscle tissue as effectively. And it's all about that fine balance of muscle protein synthesis, right, and catabolism that's going to occur every time we exercise that horse. I love Dr. Durham, your analogy of talking about the eventer. And I always think back to one of my mentors told a great story of on the human side, right? So if you go to the gym and you work and exercise as hard as you possibly can, but you come home and you drink lots of water and you eat iceberg lettuce, we're not going to be able to maintain and build lean muscle tissue. So
it's about nutrient density, right? Nutrient density, the right calories in. And that's why we talk so much about omega-3 fatty acids and antioxidants and all the things that help that whole horse stay healthy.
100%. Yeah. So oftentimes I think, we always wish there was that one magic ingredient that we need to focus on. And certainly we talk a lot about amino acids. But yes, so there's a lot of other key nutrients to think about with holistically the entire horse. Some of those, regarding muscle function, regarding developing that top line, and having those nutrients there. Certainly we want to think about that in antioxidant defense system, right? So every time we fire that muscle or we have a muscle contraction, right, you're asking that horse to do something. The mitochondria, right, within the cell, the powerhouse of the cell, are going to produce ATP or energy for that contraction to take place. And obviously, every time we do that, the byproduct, right, is reactive oxygen species, or ROS, as we'll call them. And so we've got to have this really great antioxidant defense system in place. So a couple of critical things we need to think about are selenium, of course, in the diet, and having enough, but not too much. That is one of our trace minerals that we easily can get into a toxic state. So it's got a little bit narrower window of safety there. But the reason selenium is important is it's an essential component of glutathione peroxidase. So one of those, it is probably the most critical antioxidant enzyme. Another one is vitamin E, of course. It's there because it's going to donate its electron and take care of that free radical. So it's preventing oxidative stress in the horse. Also, you mentioned omega-3 fatty acids, very, very critical for proper antioxidant function in the body. Copper and zinc are two other trace minerals that are really important to ensure for a multitude of reasons, but they're definitely involved as well. constituents of superoxide dismutase, which again is another enzyme involved in the antioxidant world. Also magnesium is another one off the top of my head, I guess. Certainly that's involved in protein synthesis as well. So, and we
and muscle
can't
function.
forget
Yeah.
salt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've noticed a lot of horses that start a quality magnesium supplement into quality vitamin E supplement get a much nicer feel to their muscles if their owner is already doing all the right things in terms of keeping them comfortable. It's really interesting to kind of feel the tissue difference between the muscles.
It's also amazing to me, at Platinum, we've lived it for almost 30 years now, but this intersection between equine and human medicine. And magnesium has been certainly of the hour. It's really getting talked about a lot, and all the different forms of magnesium, which form does different things to the body, considering what that particular body is needing, and how important it really is, and how deficient a lot of us as humans really are. So it's interesting that we deal with the same thing in our horses, certainly. So thank you for that, Abby. I really appreciate the thorough explanation. And again, those nutrient dense calories, that cool burning fuel, all of those really foundational elements that make a big difference to a healthy horse, which is much more apt to have healthy musculature, so not a far departure. And Dr. Durham, I want to bounce back over to you for a minute. And as I mentioned earlier, Dr. Durham is a board certified sports medicine and rehabilitation specialist. So I'm curious, when you encounter these cases, and you touched on it a little bit, but you talked about some of the common conditions that you're seeing that cause these, but what are your strategies? What are you deploying when you have these cases in front of you? Is it nutritional recommendations paired with rehabilitation strategies, or a change in management, perhaps, and training technique or something like that? How are you advising these riders, trainers, grooms to take on these issues head on? And then I'm going to come to Maija, because I know that she, works in this every single day, and I'd love her perspective as well. So first up, Dr. D.
Well, I think, like with anything, the first thing we have to really thoroughly understand what's going on. So the diagnosis is important. Why do we have less musculature than we would like? And the other part of that is, you can have a horse with good musculature but not a strong core. And I think that's really important as well. In particular, so for example, let's say you have a young warm blood, Belgian warm blood, bred for jumping, natural jump ability, and the thing's huge, right? He's 17 hands at 3 years old. And the problem with a horse like that is they get treated like they're an adult already. But what you're dealing with is really like a middle school or high school athlete, right? They don't have that core strength. You're not in that college athlete and then professional athlete sort of level. So what ends up happening is you treat the horse as if it's capable of doing those things. And without that strong core, like Maija was talking about, the control of the footfall, the power that they're able to generate is less, because their core is not as strong. So they're much more prone to injuries. Peter Park, who's this amazing trainer, human trainer, he is a special trainer. He's worked with all kinds of professional athletes. And one of my favorite stories of his is about this kid who was a natural on motocross bikes. He was just winning everything. Then he got injured, got kind of rehabbed, got injured again, and then he came to Peter, and Peter didn't let him do any task specific exercises for months, because he said his core was horrible. He had no core. He had the ability, but he didn't have the system in place. So Peter built him back up from scratch, essentially. And then when the kid went back, he started winning everything, and he wasn't getting injured. So I think that's something that we need to evaluate almost more in movement. We watch the horse move, and when a horse is in that gangly teenager phase, it's not that they shouldn't be working, but we probably shouldn't expect them to be able to do what that adult horse can do. And I think what Maija said, proper movement is the best treatment for most diseases. Uh, a lot of what I try to achieve is to encourage correct movement, whether that's, getting rid of a hind limb lameness, treating something in the back, and on top of that, having the client also aware of these and to do some of these extra exercises. Some of those are on the ground. The carrot stretches that we think of as sort of like, yeah, okay, whatever, that's good for neck flexibility. Those have been shown to actually build that multifidus muscle. Some of the butt tucks, and we'll let Maija talk about all the things that she does, but those core strengthening exercises are actually really quite important. So that young Belgian warm blood horse, that horse should actually be doing some dressage, not the high level dressage, but the fundamental levels of dressage. A lot of times people are like, but I'm a jumper, I don't do that. The fundamentals of dressage are gymnastic core building exercise. It's essentially like Pilates, which I learned about. My wife made me do some Pilates classes. And at first I thought, where's the weight? You're not doing anything. And then the instructor would say, no, move like this, and then it was like,
You're shaking.
painful, right? Because, oh, I guess I don't have those muscles. I don't have those connections. And that's what we're really trying to build. So whether that's in a young developing horse, because that's that sort of proactive side of things too, right? If we can build a stronger horse, they're less likely to get injured. But then also, if a horse has been in rehab for 6 or 7 months or longer, maybe they're coming back, people want to just go right back to work, but they're back in that situation where they need to rebuild that core. So even if the horse has the top line, they need to rebuild that coordination and the strength. If they really lack top line, then we're going to try to address it nutritionally. Certainly any of the underlying disease issues we want to address. But we know that in humans and in horses, just age-related muscle loss is a thing. And some of that we know can be reversed through nutrition alone. So that is a key component to the whole thing. We have to have those building blocks. And ultimately, the foundational support through nutrition isn't just about we need to build muscle. It's about supporting the overall health of every cell in the body. And that goes even back to gut health. We tend to think of gut health as just, oh, we want to prevent ulcers, we want to prevent, fecal water syndrome, we want to prevent colic. But gut health is actually really fundamental to overall body health, both in terms of supporting the immune system and also nourishing the body. And we know that horses with dysbiosis, where things have gone wrong in the microbiome, this is true in humans and horses and rats and whatever, that if there's a problem with dysbiosis, then there are more circulating inflammatory cytokines. Cytokines are those little signaling molecules that go between cells that turn on and off switches. The inflammatory cytokines, like they sound, turn on those switches. They make things sort of angry. So for horses that might have a sore joint, for horses that might have sore muscle, if you have more of those circulating inflammatory cytokines, or like Abby was talking about, the reactive oxygen species, if you have increases in those, then your overall body health is not as good, and your ability to build muscle and retain that strength is not as good as well. Sorry, another rant.
No, absolutely. Right.
So much to add. I have so much to
Yeah.
add.
Please.
Maija, so I want to come to Maija next to continue your rant. But Maija, I would love for you to educate both myself and our listeners, which I'm sure there are a lot of people listening that are
Great.
already well versed, and Dr. Durham and Abby, but a lot of people that are already well versed in what is body work. But I'd love to know, straight from the horse's mouth per se, what is your approach as a body worker, and how are you working with the veterinarian and the care team for this horse, because it's ample a lot of the time for these horses to properly assess these horses, their core musculature, their top line, and then take us through the strategies that you execute to work on these horses, because you have such a broad range. And that includes massage and myofascial release and PEMF, and the list goes on. So walk us through it. Talk to me about how you handle these cases.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's so important to me as a body worker and with my background as a groom and a rider myself, it's so important for me to be working on a team. I never want to go against what a trainer is saying or what a farrier is saying or what a vet is saying. And as much as possible, I really like, especially my regular clients and my more special cases, I really like to sit in on when they're being ridden and when they're being evaluated by their vet, so that I can learn as much as I can about what specifically is going on with that horse from a really holistic perspective. Because my expertise is their musculature and the way that their body is moving, according to their musculature and fascial system. But as we've discussed earlier in this podcast, there's really no separating the body. Like Dr. Durham was saying, how important gut health is. What we say about humans is that the stomach is the second brain. I would argue with horses, with love, horses have even smaller brains than we do. I would say with horses, the gut and the brain have this so incredibly direct feedback, not only with the horse's mental state, but I've noticed with the horse's physical body state as well. Something I've noticed is people have me out to work on a horse that's really tight in their hip flexors and in their hind end because the horse is getting really grumpy and maybe it's having issues jumping or in the lead change. And I'm asking them, has your vet um has your vet discussed any potential ulcer symptoms with you? And as much as I can be effective by working on that horse, it's so much more helpful when we have this circle of communication where the vet can come in and say, hey, I think that horse's stomach has some issues. And wouldn't you know it, so often when these horses get the help that they need from a gut and microbiome standpoint, they feel a million times better in their body. Because really what I do, in a perfect world, I get to kind of come in and be the cherry on top to an already really great team and athlete. I get to come in and, oh, you're a bit sore from working hard from a show, or, everyone has a little bit unevenness. I'm going to come in and address that unevenness. But really in an ideal situation, I get to work with a great team who has the nutrition dialed in, the gut health dialed in, the feet dialed in, the riding and the tack fit all dialed in. And then I just get to come in and have a great time. And my job is really easy when that happens. Now, one thing that is much more common, of course, because not everyone has access to all of those professionals, or we're all in the process of learning, and maybe the horse owner is in the process of learning what that perfect picture looks like for their horse, is something that's really important to me, not only as a body worker, is kind of decoding all of the little different things that a horse's body is telling me. I think that the body is what moves the horse. And that's kind of what we've been getting to, and what me and Dr. Durham have been kind of talking about back and forth more in the beginning is a lot of the time we tend to look at the horse's legs, right? We spend so much time as riders really looking at protecting the horse's legs and doing boots and doing wraps, etc. But we fail to consider that what is actually causing movement, everything that causes movement in the horse's body, from the gut on the inside and peristalsis to the outside and skeletal muscle, is muscles. So I really like to go in and be able to evaluate the horse's muscle tissue and talk to the rider and get a really detailed look at everything that that horse has had going on, from, how they were brought up. If they were a young horse that worked really hard really young, that can tell me a lot about the issues I'm going to face, to the other things that they've been going through. So every horse is so individual, and that's why it's so important to me to have a really in-depth evaluation of them. And then as I'm evaluating them, I get to have this back and forth with the owner that I really, really value. And one thing that's important to me as well is not only just doing that initial observation and that initial evaluation the first time I meet a horse, but one thing that's really important to my strategy that I teach all of my clients and my students is to constantly reevaluate. And that's, I think as a professional, a lot of the time, I get to be in this really awesome, unique position, like Dr. Durham talked about, where I get to see the horses, a lot of them, a lot more frequently than the vets necessarily do. But because I don't see them quite as frequently as the trainer or the owner, I'm a little bit more likely to pick up on something changing a bit that maybe they don't see, because they're either seeing the horse every single day or they're not reevaluating the horse. One thing I'm big on is I reevaluate the horse every time I see them, like they're a new client, because I really want to see, are they improving for the better through their top line, through the way that they feel, through their pain signs, or are they improving through the worse for the worse? And being able to teach people how to palpate their horse and pick up on those subtle pain signs themselves, a lot of the time the owner can really be an excellent first line of defense for the horse, so that they learn, like I talked about earlier, back pain can be a very early symptom of something going on in the lower limb. Or, hind end pain and hip flexor pain and general grumpiness can be a really good first sign that something is going on in the stomach. I really love to take any opportunity I can to teach the owner and the trainer to palpate and evaluate themselves, so that they can really early on catch any sort of issue and bring it to the attention of their vet.
Awesome. So takeaway is, when we find difficult people in life, we have to take a step back and think maybe you have something going on in your stomach, and give them a little grace.
Probably.
Got it. Okay. No, I love that. And I think it's interesting work that you do, and you're really helping these horses to feel and move better. But I love that you have a focus on the gut and the whole horse and all of the things that are impacted by that. Like we said earlier, those muscles are attached to a horse, and there's a lot more going on there. And I love that you take a deeper look and really have this integrated care team that you're a part of. No one's an island when it comes to a horse. So it's nice to get all of those perspectives and have a veterinarian that has a open two-way street with a farrier, that has an open two-way street with a body worker. It's the more perspectives, the better. So I really appreciate that. And kind of going a step further, Abby has given us an incredibly educated, multi-syllable introduction to nutrition, because she's really smart, on how that impacts these horses. But from your perspective, Maija, we obviously live in the world of nutrition. But how does it come into play with these cases from your perspective? Why is that so important?
Nutrition specifically.
Wow.
Yeah. So I really was excited to add my 2 cents to what Abby was saying. And that's part of the reason why I'm so excited to get to work with you guys, is because when I'm looking at a horse and they don't have the top line development that we so often want to see, to build muscle, we need 3 things, which is work, rest, and proper nutrition. And I think that what most equestrians are missing out on is the nutrition aspect of it. And it's something I see really prevalent when I see a horse that is in a really good level of work, the owner's doing all of the right things. I think a lot of the time, for whatever reason, nutrition is kind of that last missing link that a really well-informed trainer or owner kind of dials in on. They might have the tack fitted properly. They might be doing all the good things in terms of lessons. They might have a good farrier, good vet. They have me. But then that last thing that they're kind of missing is really, to me, the easiest thing to implement, because you just get to buy it. You don't even have to do all the work of learning how to ride. Like, that's really hard. Having a body worker come out all the time is hard. Just getting your nutrition dialed in does not necessarily have to be this big lift. But for whatever reason, I think there's just a little bit of an educational gap. I just noticed that I just had the conversation this morning with a really incredible, really knowledgeable trainer who every single time I see her, she makes me evaluate all of her horse's top lines. And one of her best mares is just not quite as developed as she should be for the level of work. And I said, well, have you tried an amino acid sort of supplement or top dress? And she said, oh, why would I do that? And I was like, well, trying to build an athlete without protein is like trying to build a house out of cardboard. It's just not really going to work very well. It's not going to last very long. You're not going to have these really nice lasting effects. So yeah, I think that it's honestly just one of those things, if I could wave a magic wand and educate more people about, I just think that it's so misunderstood and so needed. And one thing that I see in the field a lot, I guess I think I'm a little biased by this because of where I live. But Abby was talking about selenium and vitamin E. In my area specifically, our ground is selenium deficient. So that's something I also do just bring to the attention of my barns, because a lot of them don't know that. And I just tell all of them, hey, it could be really worthwhile talking to a nutritionist and getting your hay and stuff tested so that you can see if your hay isn't supplying adequate amounts of selenium, and that might be something you need to talk to a nutritionist about. So that's just one anecdotal thing that I bring to my people's attention.
Excellent. We do always preach that as well, as, don't overdose on the selenium supplementation if you haven't tested your horse, because there are certainly deficient areas in the country, but there are certainly areas that do not have that deficiency. So it's best to test. And no, didn't intend that rhyme, but write that down. It's best to test. But
Well,
no.
the other thing to mention about that is that selenium is commonly found in supplements, particularly supplements geared towards athletic endeavors. So it's not one of the most common reasons that I saw excesses in selenium was from people feeding several supplements that overlap in a way that where they're stacking the selenium and actually getting too much. But essentially, the selenium in the soil will reflect the selenium in whatever forage they're eating. So there are a few places in the country where it's high, Abby, right? But for the most part, it's adequate or low. So it is, and it does have that narrow therapeutic range. And it's so important. It's important for some of the thyroid hormones, as Abby was saying, also for the antioxidant, glutathione peroxidase, but also other uses as well. So it's a critical mineral, but it's tricky because you really can overdo it. And the signs when a horse is deficient and when they have too much on board are kind of similar. So you can't really tell just by looking at them. So the whole blood selenium test is really, for me, the way I know for sure.
Well, and to Maija's point, at Platinum over all these years, we've made such a concerted effort to educate both veterinarians and riders that it really isn't rocket science, nutrition, right? I mean, at its very core level, it's pretty simplistic. Horses have a very similar biological need across breeds, disciplines, ages, and so on. And then beyond that, they're like us, right? There are specific conditions they deal with and certain shortcomings from genetics or what have you. But we try to keep things simple, and it was funny. That's why I laughed earlier, Dr. Durham, because this quote from Peter Park, apparently we're all Peter Park super fans, but it keeps going through my head. And nutrition is so important because, like Peter has said, you can't outtrain a bad diet. So as much as you want to condition your horse and have them in training, if the nutrition is not dialed in, that athlete is never going to reach their genetic potential, right? They're never going to perform at their peak level, just like us. If we are not nourishing our bodies correctly, we're not performing correctly. So it is all so important, but we do, that's why people like us exist, and why people, like Abby, you can go to, and she can simplify things and help you decide, what it is that you need. Because it really shouldn't be so complex and scary that it's something that riders are just like, oh gosh, like I don't even want to go there because it's just too much to think about. It really isn't, and that's something that Platinum has prided ourselves on, is making it not so complex that it's untouchable. It's pretty simple. So
and that seems to be, I think that's a good point. Because again, I think sometimes, we'll write articles or we talk about, Maija, you brought up a great example, right? Sometimes a lot of these performance horses are selenium deficient, or they're vitamin E deficient, or magnesium. And so unfortunately, sometimes people hear those though, and they're like, oh, let me go find that supplement or that supplement or that supplement. And that's really most of the problems that we get involved with helping to undo. And so I think it's, go to that nutritionist or that company and find a comprehensive approach to that, because ultimately that's when the horse is going to do its best, is you've got nutritionists behind the scenes, right, that are thinking of all these different aspects and putting it into play. So
yeah, I love that point, Abby, because we do, a lot of people laugh. They're like, when I call Platinum, I encounter more time being talked out of buying things than I do being talked into buying things. Probably not the best business model, but it's the right way to do it, is we really do try to pare down. And that is one thing that you do want to look for. If it's not from us, you ask the questions of whoever it is that you're dealing with. You want to know that those formulas are researched. You want to know how they're sourced. You want to know how they're tested. And you also want to know that they're designed to be fed together, because to Dr. Durham's point, when you stack nutrients on top of each other in different formulas, that's when you can get to those toxic levels in certain things, certainly not everything, but in certain things. And so you do want to know that those formulas are designed to be fed together. And when you do choose things from several different companies along the line, that risk is there a little bit more prevalently. So if it's not going to be from us, just ask the right questions of whoever it is that you are choosing for your feed and your supplementation, for sure. So Dr. Durham, I want to come back over to you on the spot, and just, as we wind down, do you have any closing thoughts, sir, on, the top or musculature that you want to leave us with?
I think there are two things. To me, one, the core musculature is a reflection of the horse's overall health in a lot of ways, and that the horse's overall health is going to reflect on the top line in all sorts of ways. The gut, we talked a little bit about, certainly nutrition, any of the diseases that might cause malnutrition, essentially, that's an obvious one. But I think paying attention to the top line and really understanding the difference between fat and muscle up there, that's a big one, because we want the muscle up there. That's going to help the horse live its life to its fullest. If it has that muscle, it needs that capability. So I think even for horses who aren't top level athletes, that top line is a reflection of their overall health, and we should really be paying attention to it. And then the way to fix that isn't one thing. It's not just nutrition. It's not just exercise. I like the way Maija phrases it. We need rest too, right? That's when a lot of healing happens, which includes sleep. We haven't really talked about that, but that's something that's really critical, in particular for show horses, when they're crammed into those little 10 by 10 portable stalls with the lights on all night and the music on all night and the braiders. They never sleep. That can affect their performance because of, increased cortisol. They, like us, need REM sleep. And part of REM sleep is restoration and repair of not just in the brain, but the tissues throughout the body overall. So I think managing horses, and also, as Maija said, that it's not, the back is not just sort of like, oh, we're going to coddle this horse so he's going to get a massage. No, the back is critical for all horses. And from the retired horse to the young developing horse, I think we sort of forget in those horses that they're building that, and we want to build it correctly and slowly, but that that top line and then the core in general reflects overall body health in ways that go way beyond just athletic ability.
No, that rings so true. And I love that you brought up sleep. And I actually want to reference all of our listeners to a podcast that we did with Dr. Christine Fuchs, who is a German veterinarian who is just right on the cusp of the latest research when it comes to sleep and how sleep deficiencies in horses really do impact their performance, but also propensity for injury, and so many different things. And it blew my mind talking to her because there's so many of these little things that I'm sure Dr. Durham and Maija, take into consideration. But for a lot of us as riders every day, especially those that show horses, we're not really thinking, as much as we probably should be about that quality sleep and how interrupted it really is, especially when horses are hauled and they're on the road and they're showing. So that conversation with Dr. Fuchs is really interesting and very in-depth on sleep. So I encourage everybody to go and listen to that. And Maija, I will toss it to you to round us out. So any closing thoughts, Madame?
My big closing thought is that nothing can beat the basics. So, I think that really, to me, the basics are good nutrition, good farrier work, good fitting tack, good riding. And then everything else you can do for your horse, the blankets, me as the body worker, that's all on top. But you really, you can't underestimate the basic good horsemanship when it comes to your horses and your success together and your longevity, and really just getting to enjoy the journey with them.
Excellent. I love it. And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen, a start to finish look at the equine core and a zero in on the top line. And the moral of the story being that a well-rounded approach to maintaining top line strength is vital, and that a well-integrated care team can make a tremendous difference to the horse. So I want to thank Dr. Matt Durham, clinical nutritionist Abby Keegan, and body worker Maija Luttinger for joining me today and lending us their expertise on this topic. So I hope you all learned as much as I did, which was a lot, and that you join us for the next one. So until then, folks, I'm Jessie Bengoa. Take care, all.